The midday sun bathed Buckingham Palace in a warm glow, its majestic facade radiating a timeless grandeur. Outside the iron gates, tourists gathered in clusters, snapping photos and chattering in various languages. Children waved Union Jack flags while parents captured the iconic scene on their smartphones. Amidst the lively crowd, one figure stood motionless, a royal guard in full ceremonial uniform, his tall black bearskin hat towering over the bustling scene. This was George Branson, a veteran guard in his early 60s. Beneath the stoic exterior was a man of discipline and vigilance, honed by decades of military service. His salt and pepper hair peeked slightly beneath his hat, and his blue eyes scanned the area with a subtle sharpness. To the untrained eye, George appeared indifferent, a mere symbol of tradition. But inside, his instincts were alert. Something felt off. At the edge of the crowd, a group of men stood apart, their demeanor incongruous with the cheerful atmosphere. Their leader, a burly man named Liam Cross, exuded an air of arrogant confidence. Clad in a weathered leather jacket, he sneered as he watched the tourists. His friends chuckled and whispered among themselves, casting glances at George. "Think he's as tough as he looks?" Liam muttered loudly, ensuring his words reached the surrounding crowd. He stepped forward, his swagger deliberate, and smirked. "But he wouldn't even flinch if I knocked that silly hat off his head." The crowd's chatter subsided, a ripple of unease spreading among the onlookers. George remained still, his face impassive. Years of training had taught him to maintain composure, to weather taunts and provocations without breaking discipline. Yet, his gaze flickered momentarily to the side gate of the palace. A worker in overalls was unloading crates from a van, his movements hurried and furtive. Liam's gang edged closer, their jeers growing louder. "What's the matter, old man?" "Scared?" one of them called out. George's grip on his ceremonial rifle tightened ever so slightly. His focus shifted back to the worker, who was now glancing nervously toward the crowd. Another man joined him, their whispered exchange too far to hear, but laden with urgency. George's instincts prickled. This wasn't just routine unloading, it was something else entirely. The crowd's unease turned to murmurs of alarm as Liam stepped boldly forward. With a theatrical flourish, he reached out and flicked the brim of George's hat. The crowd gasped. George didn't move. "See? He's nothing but a statue," Liam crowed, turning to his friends for approval. But before he could revel in his mockery, a firm voice cut through the tension. "That's enough," said an elderly man with a cane, stepping forward. His presence commanded immediate respect. "Leave him be, son. You're out of your depth." Liam hesitated, his bravado wavering. The old man's eyes met George's briefly, and a subtle understanding passed between them. George's attention returned to the side gate, where the workers had vanished along with the crates. The storm was coming, and George was ready. Al's pulse quickened, but he remained still, every fiber of his being trained to project calmness despite the brewing storm. His sharp eyes followed the worker who had slipped through the side gate. The man was carrying a small crate now, his posture tense, glancing around as if expecting to be caught. Another worker appeared, this one wheeling a larger container. Their movements were too coordinated to be a coincidence. Brad's gang continued their taunts, emboldened by the crowd's attention. "What's the matter, soldier boy? Lost your nerve?" Brad sneered, throwing Al's hat into the air like a trophy. His gang erupted in laughter, their voices cutting through the tension like a blade. Yet, Al's focus wasn't on them anymore. His mission, his duty, was far greater than responding to petty provocations. The elderly man with the cane stepped forward again, his presence commanding respect. "Enough," he said, his voice low but firm. The crowd's chatter faltered, and even Brad's bravado waned momentarily. "You're out of your depth, son." Brad scoffed but took a half step back, the weight of the old man's words cutting through his bluster. The stranger turned his attention to Al, his gaze meeting the guards. There was a flicker of understanding, a silent exchange between two men who had seen their share of danger. Al's earpiece crackled softly, barely audible beneath the noise of the crowd. "Sentinel 1, confirm status," The voice of the palace's security officer came through. Without breaking his stance, Al replied in a whisper, "Suspicious activity at the side gate. 2 suspects, crates in motion. Potential breach. Understood. Back up en route." Al's instinct screamed at him to act, but protocol demanded patience. His duty wasn't just to guard, but to ensure the safety of those around him, and to wait for the right moment. His eyes flickered back to Brad and his gang, who were beginning to lose interest. Their antics weren't yielding the reaction they had hoped for, and the crowd's murmurs had turned to disapproval. "Let's go," one of Brad's friends muttered, tugging at his sleeve. But Brad wasn't ready to back down. He stepped closer to Al, his voice dripping with false bravado. "You think you're better than us? Just standing there?" At that moment, a loud crash echoed from the direction of the loading dock. The crowd gasped, heads turning toward the source of the noise. Al's jaw tightened. It was the confirmation he needed. The elderly man's cane tapped twice more on the cobblestones. "Go," he said quietly. Al broke protocol, his movements swift and purposeful. He strode past Brad without a word, his focus locked on the side gate. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the urgency in his stride. Brad watched, his smirk faltering as he realized that this was no ordinary guard. As Al approached the side gate, he caught sight of the 2 workers again. They were loading the large crate into an unmarked truck, their movements hurried and nervous. The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. This wasn't just a distraction, it was a heist. The loading dock erupted into a cacophony of shouts and scuffling footsteps. 2 men in worker uniforms struggled to maneuver a large crate into the back of an unmarked truck. The crate's edges were splintered, revealing flashes of gold and intricate carvings beneath the protective fabric. These were no ordinary goods. They were royal treasures, priceless relics of the monarchy. "Freeze!" Al's voice boomed across the chaos, his tone unyielding. The command cut through the din like a knife. One of the men spun around, panic etched across his face. "Who the hell is this guy?" he spat, his hand inching toward a concealed weapon. "The guard," his partner hissed, his own movements betraying unease. "Take him out." But Al Thornton was far from ordinary. Decades of military service had honed his reflexes to razor sharpness. Before the first man could draw his weapon, Al closed the distance with precision. A swift strike to the wrist sent the weapon clattering to the ground. Al followed up with a controlled takedown, pinning the man to the pavement. The second man lunged with a crowbar, but Al sidestepped effortlessly, countering with a forceful elbow that left his attacker reeling. The old man with the cane, who had been silently observing until now, sprang into action. With surprising agility, he swung his cane low, sweeping the legs out from under a third assailant who had emerged from the shadows. "Stay down," the old man growled, planting his cane firmly on the prone man's chest. The would-be thieves' resistance crumbled as quickly as their confidence. Within moments, the situation was under control. Al's earpiece crackled to life. "Police en route. Secure the area." "Understood," Al replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. He scanned the dock, his sharp eyes sweeping over the scene. Yet something gnawed at him. The chaos, the brazen theft, the coordinated timing, this wasn't random. It was part of a larger, more calculated operation. The faint hum of approaching sirens grew louder, but Al's attention shifted to the crowd that had gathered nearby. Among the mix of concerned and curious faces, one figure stood out, a man in a tailored black suit. He lingered at the edge of the scene, his demeanor calm, his expression unreadable. Al's eyes locked onto the man's. For a fleeting moment, their gazes clashed like swords. Then, just as swiftly as he had appeared, the man in the suit turned and vanished into the crowd. Al's gut tightened. This wasn't just a petty theft. That man, his calculated smirk and cool demeanor, had orchestrated written all over him. As the police stormed onto the scene, handcuffing the subdued assailants and securing the crate, Al approached the officer in charge. "There's more to this," he said quietly. "The man in the suit, he's the one pulling the strings?" The officer nodded, but skepticism lingered in his eyes. Al knew convincing them would take more than a hunch. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The man in the suit had disappeared, but his shadow loomed large. AL's mission had only just begun. The dimly lit security room buzzed with quiet tension. Screens displaying live feeds from every corner of Buckingham Palace flickered, their light casting shadows across the faces of Al Thornton and the other officials gathered. Al leaned forward, replaying the footage of the man in the black suit. The camera zoomed in on his sharp features, the confident smirk that sent a chill down AL's spine. "Who is he?" Al asked, his voice sharp with urgency. "Victor Kane," the old man with the cane answered, stepping out of the shadows. His tone was grave, each word deliberate. "An underground broker with a reputation for smuggling priceless artifacts. If Kane's involved, this wasn't a simple heist, it's a message." AL's eyes narrowed. "How does he know our protocols?" He maneuvered around security too easily. The old man's expression darkened. "He has someone on the inside. And if we don't find them fast, this won't be the last attempt." The head of security, Graham Wells, broke the silence. "We'll run background checks on all personnel with access to the loading dock and artifact storage." He gestured to his team. "Start with Daniels. He's been acting strangely for weeks." AL's gut twisted. Daniels was the assistant curator, responsible for overseeing artifact security. The thought of betrayal within their ranks weighed heavily on him. "I'll handle Daniels personally," Al said, rising to his feet. His voice was steady, but anger simmered beneath the surface. Before he could leave, the old man placed a hand on his shoulder. "Kane isn't just a thief," he warned. "He's meticulous. Daniels might just be the start of his web. Don't underestimate him." Al nodded, his resolve hardening. "I won't." The palace corridors were eerily quiet as Al made his way to Daniels' office. He found the assistant curator hunched over his desk, nervously shuffling through documents. At the sound of AL's footsteps, Daniels froze, his hand lingering over a stack of files. "Evening, Daniels," Al said, his tone casual but probing. "Long night." Daniels forced a smile. "Just catching up on some inventory reports." AL's eyes drifted to the files on the desk. One was marked confidential. "Artifact movements. Mind if I take a look?" Al asked, already stepping closer. Daniels hesitated, his face paling. "Of course, but it's nothing unusual." Before he could finish, AL's hand darted out, grabbing the folder. He flipped through its contents, his jaw tightening. Detailed schedules, security routines, even floor plans, all things that could have aided the heist. Daniels stammered. It's not what it looks like." Al fixed him with a steely gaze. "Then explain it." Before Daniels could answer, an alert sounded over AL's earpiece. "Security breach in the East Wing. Possible intruders." AL's blood ran cold. "Stay here," he ordered Daniels, though he doubted the man would comply. As he rushed toward the East Wing, the old man's warning echoed in his mind. Kane's web was larger than it seemed, and time was running out. The air in the tunnels beneath Buckingham Palace was damp and heavy, the faint hum of machinery echoing off the stone walls. Al Thornton adjusted his grip on the crate he was carrying, his worker's disguise blending seamlessly with the convoy. Around him, other guards, similarly disguised, moved purposefully, creating the illusion of a hurried relocation of the palace's most valuable artifacts. The ruse worked. Hidden cameras positioned throughout the tunnels revealed movement. 3 figures clad in black, their faces obscured by masks. Victor Kane led the way, his confident stride betraying no doubt. His men flanked him, each carrying tools meant for breaking, cutting, and extracting. They were closing in. AL's earpiece buzzed. "Target acquired. Keep moving. We'll spring the trap at Junction 9. Al grunted in acknowledgement, his eyes scanning the dimly lit passageways. Every step brought him closer to the confrontation he had been anticipating. As they approached the designated junction, Al placed his crate down and stepped back into the shadows, his hand resting on the concealed baton at his hip. The old man with the cane, positioned further ahead, gave a subtle nod. They were ready. The intruders rounded the corner, their focus fixed on the decoy crates lined against the wall. "There it is," Kane said, his voice low and triumphant. "Grab them. Quickly." Al stepped into the light, his stance firm and unyielding. "This ends now," he declared, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Kane stopped, his smirk unfaltering. "You really think you can stop me, guard? This is bigger than you." "Drop the tools," Al ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Instead of complying, Kane revealed a small device in his hand, a detonator. One step closer, and this entire place goes up in flames. Al's gaze didn't waver. "Your explosives are disabled. We found them all. Surrender now." For the first time, Kane's confidence faltered. He glanced at the detonator, then at his men, whose unease was becoming apparent. Realizing his bluff had been called, he snarled and made a break for it, darting toward a side passage. Al sprang into action, his movements swift and precise. He intercepted Kane, pinning him against the wall in one fluid motion. The detonator clattered to the ground, harmless. One of Kane's men lunged at Al, but the old man with the cane intervened, swinging his makeshift weapon with practiced ease. The assailant crumpled, groaning. The remaining operative hesitated, then bolted back the way they had come, only to be met by a contingent of palace guards blocking the exit. He dropped his tools and raised his hands, his escape cut off. With Kane restrained and his men subdued, Al turned to the crates. Carefully prying one open, he confirmed the artifacts were intact. The golden scepters, jeweled crowns, and ancient relics glinted under the dim lights, their rightful place secured once more. "It's over," the old man said, his voice steady but weary. Al nodded, his grip on Kane tightening. "For now, but there's always another storm brewing. Let's make sure we're ready." The first rays of sunlight glinted off the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows on the cobblestone streets. The city was waking up, its usual rhythm resuming, oblivious to the events of the night before. Al Thornton stood at his post, his ceremonial uniform pristine, his tall black bearskin hat perfectly positioned. To the growing crowd of tourists gathering beyond the gates, he was just another stoic royal guard. But beneath the unyielding exterior, Al bore the weight of the night's events. His sharp instincts and unwavering resolve had thwarted a heist that could have shaken the monarchy to its core. He had uncovered a mole within their ranks, dismantled a dangerous network, and faced down Victor Kane, a man whose reach extended far beyond these gates. Yet, even with Kane's operatives in custody and the artifacts secure, Al knew the fight was far from over. The familiar tap of a cane pulled him from his thoughts. The old man approached, his weathered face etched with approval and a hint of humor. "You did good, soldier," he said, his voice steady despite the fatigue that tugged at the corners of his eyes. Al nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Kane's still out there," he said quietly, his tone betraying a mix of determination and frustration. "This isn't over." The old man smirked, his grip on the cane tightening. "Then we'll be ready," he replied. "Men like Kane thrive on fear and complacency. They test defenses, exploit weaknesses. But you," he paused, his eyes meeting Al's. "You're exactly the kind of man who ensures they fail." A faint smile flickered at the corner of Al's lips before disappearing. He didn't need praise. The work itself was its own reward. As the morning unfolded, the tourists continued their routine, cameras clicking, children waving flags, and chatter filling the air. None of them noticed the slight shift in Al's stance as his eyes scanned the crowd with renewed vigilance. To them, he was just another guard, a symbol of tradition. But Al was more than that. He was a sentinel, a protector, a silent guardian, standing watch over history and the future alike. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warmth over the palace, Al tightened his grip on his rifle. Because symbols endure, but it's the people behind them who ensure their survival.